Hey guys, how's it going? Noble Phantasms. You know them, you can't skip them, and they are the most important thing to know about any servant that you summon. In most Fate content, the Noble Phantasm of a servant is their trump card, something to only really be whipped out when absolutely necessary. Normally they want to hide this because revealing a Noble Phantasm makes it so that you can identify a servant, and knowing who you're fighting immediately makes them easier to deal with. This can be detrimental to some servants, like Achilles or Siegfried, who have very well-known weaknesses. So, waiting for the right time to fire it off is always in the favor of the servant. But some servants have Noble Phantasms that really just don't make any sense, or feeling completely unfitting to them. A Noble Phantasm itself can be anything from a sacred artifact, a work of the servant's own creation made manifest, or a redoing of a legendary feat that they accomplished in life. So, it begs the question, why are some of the Noble Phantasms so weird and unfitting? So today I have picked a handful of servants that I want to put under the microscope and discuss why they may have the Noble Phantasms that they do, and what they should have been instead. I'm just going to let you all know this up top. Ones that have been chalked up to what I'm going to call Fate nonsense aren't going to be discussed because it's just that. Nonsense. These will be servants that have been heavily altered and thus given a Noble Phantasm that fits their new form, usually something more in line with Fate lore than real life lore. So think things like Ivan, Altair, and Castergills. So, without further ado, let's take a look. The first servant that came to mind for me was Benkei. Benkei's current Noble Phantasm is the Pilgrimage of the 500 Arhat, which from my research is in reference to a Korean Buddhist tradition, which tells of 500 of Siddhartha Gautama's followers choosing to wait to enter Nirvana and compiling all of the Buddha's teachings into the sutras. What does this have to do with Benkei, you may ask? Well, he is what is known as a mountain ascetic, or Yamabushi, and was raised to be a monk from a very young age. So, the sutras are very closely tied to his upbringing. But is this what Benkei himself is most known for? Not at all. Benkei's most famous tale is of him challenging warriors at night to duels. His overall goal was to defeat 1,000 warriors and claim their swords from them. He managed to do this to 999 warriors, until one night on a bridge he came across a young warrior. When Benkei challenged him, the warrior agreed, but then easily defeated the monk. Frustrated, Benkei then attempted to challenge them again, this time in front of a temple, and again the young warrior defeated them. This young warrior then offered to take Benkei into his service, and thus the bond between Ushiwakamaru and Benkei was formed. So a more fitting Noble Phantasm would be something like Challenge at Midnight, Victor of 999 Blades, and could also play on the idea that Benkei killed at least 100 men in every battle that he fought. So an anti-army Noble Phantasm. Now, I'm sure some of you may be thinking to yourself, klidge, I'm one of the 58 people who've actually got my Benkei to bond level 5, and it's actually not him, it's supposed to be Hitachibo Kaisan. First off, congrats on the bond 5 Benkei. Second, if we want to stick with this argument, then we should have a Noble Phantasm that focus on Kaisan's achievements, being that he supposedly reached immortality, and spread the grand tale of Ushiwakamaru everywhere that he went as though he himself had witnessed it. In fact, there are even historical allegations that he was spotted spreading this tale 400 years after the Genpei War. So then rather than a mild curse, a stun, and a debuff thing that he does, giving him a Noble Phantasm called the Wandering Tales of Shana-O, which buffs his allies, would fit him so much better. Kaisan is more famous as a storyteller, so something akin to a caster NP would fit him significantly better. Keeping with the Japanese theme, let's talk about Shuten. Described as the bandit leader of the Oni of Mount Oi and one of Japan's big three yokai, her being given a Noble Phantasm, which is essentially poisoned wine, seems a bit off. For those who don't know, it has been confirmed that her Noble Phantasm is the wine that was used to immobilize her during her legend, given to her by Raiko as a gift in order to kill her. So, I raised an eyebrow onto why that is her Noble Phantasm. Fate justifies this by simply claiming, hey, she likes it. But enjoying a drink does not a Noble Phantasm make. Otherwise, I would be able to summon a wave of Guinness after I die. Something that would fit, that is more in line with her legend, would be an NP that procs upon her death. Shuten is well known for her last-ditch effort of trying to kill Raiko, even after her head had been completely removed by launching her head at her. Of course, this ultimately failed, but having the ability to defy death in order to do a complete retaliatory attack would be a much more fitting Noble Phantasm. Alternatively, having something along the lines of being the Oni King would be interesting. Something that can gather those with wicked hearts to her cause to eventually fulfill a devilish plan would be great. Remember, Shuten's ultimate goal was to sack Kyoto out of vengeance for her home of the Oni being taken from them. So, something that inspires evil or monster type enemies would work perfectly. So I partially lied, because I want to talk about Ozymandias. Now, I have a lot of problems with Ozzy's portrayal in Fate, not the least of which is that he's just Gilgamesh again, though more likable. So, for those of you who have no context for his Fate appearance and have never questioned why he is a writer, he has two Noble Phantasms, both of which that are active in FGO. He has his secondary one, which is where all of his attacks come from, which is called Mesketet, the Boat of the Sun. This is a boat that is This is a divine artifact that he is able to fly around because he is described as the son of Ra. This comes from the belief that the pharaohs were descendants of the gods, thus giving him the right to use it. His other NP, and the one that he uses as his one in-game, is Ramsium Tentirus, which is a massive temple that essentially makes him a god with various levels of protection added to it. Now, here's my primary issue with all of this, and it's entirely about how he's portrayed in Fate and the choice of the name. If he appeared and was called Ramses II, I would be more willing to accept these. But the naming convention of Ozymandias is in reference to a very specific sonnet by Percy Shelley of the same name. The sonnet describes coming across a massive pair of stone legs in the desert and writing on it that says, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Gaze upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." The sonnet itself is meant to be a message on hubris, and that even as one believes that they are invincible during their life, time will eventually swallow all of your achievements and leave nothing but sand. Given that he quotes this exact sonnet in his NP, we can confirm that this is exactly where he gets the namesake from. So, a more fitting noble phantasm would honestly be one that's just called Ozymandias as ages pass, and could be something that completely drains all the energy of those that he is fighting, so a massive amount of debuffs as the enemy is forced to age. Looking back, they do actually play around with this concept in the pyramid, but honestly, I'd prefer something that wasn't just dropping a pyramid on people's heads and calling it a debuff. Cool as that may be. So Jason is another one that is bizarre to me. They opted to go the joke angle with him being completely unable to do anything on his own, and that his noble phantasm relies on summoning the strength of his former comrades. This is fine and all, but there are two different noble phantasms that would have fit him significantly better, and they are obvious. I'll start by quoting Jason himself. Wait, a saber? Not a lancer or a rider? This is possible foreshadowing for something in the future, but is something worth bringing up. Why his noble phantasm isn't actually the Argo itself, and is rather the people on the Argo, is odd. And it comes to the implications that Jason himself is capable of summoning servants, or at the very least shadow servants, which for being a saber is pretty impressive. But being able to summon the Argo itself and pulling a Drake would have definitely fit better, so let's just say that's what his rider form would do. His lancer form would actually share something in common with Medea, that being the Argon coin, which is a skill that his saber form has. The Argon coin is another name for the golden fleece that Jason was forced to go and get. Why this has only been attributed to being a skill for not one but two servants now, rather than their noble phantasm, is beyond me, given that it's the central part of the entire legend. It fits perfectly with the legends of both Medea and Jason. For reference, the golden fleece is tied to Poseidon and is the origin of the constellation Aries, and supposedly was capable of giving the holder flight in some versions of the tale. It has been relegated to a heel in Fate for some reason, when it could have been something so much more, for as important to his story as the golden fleece is, it's deserving of being at least one of their noble phantasms. One that has a Fate-based explanation and kind of got a redux recently, but I want to talk about anyway, is James Moriarty. Don't get me wrong, I love the dynamics of an asteroid thing, but can you imagine how much cooler and how much better fitting it would have been if he had a mirrored version of Sherlock's, in that rather than applying a bunch of offensive and defensive buffs, it applies debuffs that are effectively the same thing. So, if you don't recall, the reason why he is an archer in Fate has to do with what happened in Shinjuku, in which he merged with the free shooter, thus giving him the coffin gun. Like I said up front, they kind of already alleviated this by making Moriarty Ruler be the anti-good servant that he was really always meant to be. Qin Liang Yu's noble phantasm is based on a real-life account of her receiving poems from the Emperor. This was an incredibly high honor, especially considering the fact that Liang Yu was a female, the only female general in all the Han Dynasty for that matter, which is certainly a grand achievement. While this is certainly a grand achievement, Liang Yu had a much more lasting contribution to her people, in that she actually brought a proper infrastructure to the people that she governed over and allowed them to flourish. So, while the poems are nice and all, having something along the lines of like flourishing agriculture, the rewards at war's end, would fit her amazingly well. In all honesty, all that you need to do to change that is just have the buffs become AoE rather than just on her. Liang Yu desperately needs more love. Mephistopheles is a not forgotten servant because he's kind of bland save for his one amazing skill. Mephisto is from the original Deal with the Devil tale of Faust, something I am personally very familiar with. Surprisingly, the theme given to Mephisto is perfect, that being a devilish clown that has a watch that is constantly counting down to when your contract expires so he can claim your soul. The story itself is incredibly compelling and should be read by all of you. In fact, it's now required reading. My issue with his current manifestation in Fate has everything to do with the presentation. In Fate, his NP is a bomb that explodes, which I guess technically fits the kind of theming that they're trying to go with. But if you want something that's more in line with the legend itself, it would be something like a 3-turn massive buff to stats that, after the timer expires, deals lethal damage to the servant it's applied to. Think of it like a mixture of Chen Gong and Oberon's third skill. It would tie in so much better and probably actually make him viable. The last servant I want to bring up is Dino Mom herself, Kiyoko. Her current NP is actually something more akin to something an Avenger would have, as it is described as her boiling hatred and explosion of her madness enhancement skill that is only kept rooted by inflicting pain unto herself. However, in her legend she actually has a very unique ability, and one that has a direct debuff tied to it in Fate: sleep. Koyo's legend has her serenade a general into a deep slumber, from which he is supposed to never awaken. The general is able to do so though, thanks to divine intervention, and then he kills Koyo. So, rather than this explosion of hatred and betrayal thing, having an NP called Napping Under the Autumn Leaves, Sleeping Eternal, that could put the enemies into a permasleep status that can only be woken up if they're hit by a certain card type, would be genius. Honestly, probably Buster would fit because, you know, Berserker. Telling you, Lasagna, hire me, I've got some good ideas. Anyway, that's all I've got for you guys today. Check out all the links down below. Hey, we've got some klidge mugs and stickers for sale. If you're interested in that, the link is down below. Sub to catch these as they go up. If you have a video idea, let me know and I might be able to do it. Check out my Twitch for less structured content. I also have a Twitter, but for now, keep your chin up. Peace.